Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Public Enemy. This is continuing my quest to review as much of William Wellman's filmography as I possibly can, and this is the next film in the order of his filmography, and it's a true classic, The Public Enemy. This is from 1931. It is the next film in his filmography that I could at least see. Tom Powers, who's played by James Cagney, and his lifelong friend Matt Doyle, played by Edward Woods, who you see from children from about 1910, I believe. They rise up and slowly get higher and higher up in the gangster world. It was made in 1931. The Depression has already started, and this is a Warner Brothers picture. Warner Brothers is kind of known for making kind of working class films, working class urban films. This was their thing. Every studio had their own little niche, and that was Warner Brothers, or at least at that time. Now they just release movies for the most part. But at the time, Warner Brothers was kind of the gritty, working class, urban movie. And most of their theaters are actually located in more urban locations because, you know, the studios had their own theaters at that time. So it kind of worked out with the theater locations they had. And I think this is a working class gangster film because in most gangster films, I think when we think of gangster films today, we think of Scarface and The Godfather are kind of the two. I mean, the Al Pacino one for most of you. And if you think of those films, you think of a guy who starts out as like not being in the organization and then becomes the head of the organization. And that's kind of how most of us look at the structure of a gangster film. I mean, look at American Gangster. But in Public Enemy, he always has a boss. Whether it's Putty Nose as his boss at the beginning when he's a kid, then it's Patty Ryan, and then he works for Patty Ryan and Nails Nathan. Like, he has two bosses. He's never the head of the organization. He always has a boss. He's always a mob enforcer. He doesn't go further than that. Wellman was really into kind of working class stories. I mean, Wings is kind of a working class story, and also stories about how people are thrust to doing things because of the times they live in. Their life and society at the time kind of wills them into being this certain character. And I look at Tom Powers, the character James Cagney plays, and I think that's really true because he is a product of his time. He is a gangster during Prohibition. He was a gangster before. If there wasn't a Prohibition, he would have been a gangster of some sort. But the gangster he became was very much a 1920s gangster. Cagney in this film is just fucking amazing. I love Cagney in this film. James Cagney, when he walks on, there's a line in the documentary on this DVD where Martin Scorsese says he showed it to the cast and crew of The Aviator, and someone said, and modern screen acting is born. And it's kind of very much like that, because when you look at Cagney's performance, you can see the connection to Brando and what Brando would influence and kind of method acting and all of that. But I mean, Cagney wasn't doing that. Cagney was a song and dance man. Cagney brought kind of like a nervousness to him. He never felt easy or comfortable in any scene. He always felt like he could get in a fight, and he was very aggressive. Like the way he even like said I love you to his mom and to anyone he knew or any girl he was going out with was his little jab, little punch. He could never just kiss them or hug them. He was so aggressive and untamed and almost like a wild dog. Cagney was a song and dance man. You can see that in this film. He uses physicality quite well, and like with the punches and with his little two-step he does after he meets Jean Harlow. There's a lot of like cool little dances he puts in here, little moves that I think most actors wouldn't be as agile with, and it gives him kind of like an unpredictability. Also, Little Caesar and this film are often tied together. The technology in this film is so much more advanced because in Little Caesar and a lot of the early 30s films that are really contained and static and the camera's not moving, and Wellman was a bigger director at this time than a lot of those guys were, and he could come in and he was like, look, I want to make this movie and I want a bigger budget than Little Caesar and all those gangster pictures, and I want to make this bigger budget gangster film, and they let him do it. And the first time I saw Little Caesar in comparison to this, because I love Public Enemy so much, I was kind of disappointed, and it's because they came up with better technology for the microphones. They have a lot of outside material, like when Cagney meets Jean Harlow, that's all outside, and that was pretty revolutionary at the time. Not a lot of movies were doing that, and it probably made it a little more successful because it's a lot more dynamic. The camera never really stays still. It almost feels like the camera is a little uneasy, like it moves, it sways a little bit. Like Wellman was sick of like this crappy beginning of the sound era. Like, you really wanted to move the camera around. I mean, this is the guy who directed Wings. He moves the camera all over the place, and then suddenly he has to be contained. I never got the impression that he really liked that. You can tell in Public Enemy, he almost feels like a nervous kid who can't sit still. Like, the camera's zooming in and out, and there's not a lot of editing, really. There's a lot of, like, single shots. You'd be surprised how little editing there is in The Public Enemy. It worked because because all these actors came from theater, so they could do that. The camera just won't stay still, and it makes for kind of a lot more of an interesting film. It gives it more of an aggressive, nervous edge, and it goes with Cagney's performance. I really like the camera work in this. I mean, sometimes it has a bit of a silent film edge to it, specifically the last shot and the shot of the dead cop, or at least his gun smoking and his top hat. It's very effective the way he uses the camera, and there's nothing that's wasted in this film. It's like precise and it counts, but it still has the nervousness of the camera. It's a little more shakier than you're used to for this era, especially because this was probably one of the first films people had seen in a little bit with real camera movement, because they've been stuck because they had to have the camera still, because they had to have it in this box so you wouldn't record the camera motor, and they found better technology for this film. They had mufflers on the camera, and they found ways around it for this film. So this film, like when you compare this to Little Caesar's way more of a early sound era film than Public Enemy is. Public Enemy is like kind of like the future, a step forward. And Wellman could do that, and that showed the power he had at the time. Cagney's brother in the film, who's played by Donald Cook. The performance Donald Cook gives in this film I find really interesting. When I'm talking about early sound era, everyone was really into diction and speak slowly so the mic could pick up everything exactly. And Cagney's coming in with rapid fire delivery. He's coming in with slang. He's very different. A lot of the actors in this film are more trained to be early sound era actors, and Cagney just doesn't give a fuck, and that's what's so great about his performance. I think that's also one of the things that helped his performance and helped this film become so big, is you're so used to like this slow talking and everything's nice and pretty, and Jean Harlow speaks like that. A lot of people have said she sounds like an alien. No one understands why her line reads are the way they are in this movie. They're very strange. That's why Cagney is so, I think, sounds so aggressive and is so different from what people are used to. But when you look at Donald Cook, who plays Mike, he looks like a silent film actor. I mean, silent film had just ended like 2 years before, but even like his sunken eyes, he looks more like someone who'd be famous previous to this film. And Cagney is like new and fresh, and Donald Cook, who's playing his brother, is supposed to be the authority, and Cagney is like the younger brother, the upstart, you know, the rabble-rouser, the gangster, and he's so different. I like the juxtaposition between the two brothers. Even when you look at them together, like Mike Powers is very tall and slim, and Tom Powers is like a little shorter and bulkier and more aggressive and less put together. They're really polar opposites. It really imposes the moral attitude that Mike Powers has to like Tom, who's loose and fun. You look at the disclaimers at the beginning, which they're trying to say like, oh, these aren't just glorifying gangsters. And I never understood why people think gangster films glorify gangsters. The gangsters like always fucking die and go to jail. That does not look like something I would want to do. I don't know. Maybe I'm watching them wrong. Then the moral people who object to these films think of gangster films. They had to put the things at the beginning because they're worried about, like, even though this is pre-code, they were really worried about like what people are going to say about it. And Daryl F. Zanuck was trying to kind of appease them basically, and they even put a bigger introduction when they re-released it with Little Caesar, and even cut down some scenes just because this film was so like indecent, I guess. But not too many scenes. It's really just 3 scenes. That's the thing about Cagney's character. He's a sociopath, but you really like fall in love with him. You know, you really like him. You know, even though you see him when he kills Putty Nose, that's a really disturbing scene. And he just kills him. He's like, yeah, let's just call the girls, let's go out. He just like doesn't bother him at all. But you really fall in love with him as an audience. Like, I actually finally got to see this on the big screen. I was shocked at how the other times I found it a lot more disturbing. When you see it on the big screen, I get why this film became such a hit. It even played in Times Square for 24 hours on a loop. And when I watched it, I was like, I'm like totally with him this whole time. I'm totally, you know, I understand he's a sociopath, but I really have a connection to him. Cagney is different on the big screen. You have an intense attachment to him as with this character. It's funny that they have the part at the end to kind of justify the morals of it, because I think it's kind of a joke, because for the most part I'm not really concerned with the morals. I'm not concerned with him being put to justice. You almost want to keep seeing him do it because you fall in love with the story so much. Originally Edward Woods was supposed to play Tom Powers and James Cagney was supposed to play Matt Doyle, and they switched it. And apparently they even casted, when they have the earlier in the film, when they have the 2 young kids and they're played by Frank Darrow and Frank Colgan, I think, they were cast to be the older guys, but they forgot to switch the cast around for them. So when you watch the beginning, it does seem a little odd that suddenly like Tom Powers is taller than Matt Doyle. And Frankie Darro would be in films with Cagney and was in Wellman's Wild Boys The Road. He plays a good Cagney, but it's almost like we get a little bit of a preview what Cagney could have been like in the Matt Doyle role. Apparently they may have shot footage of it, no one's sure. Some say it's because Cagney did a couple films before that. Some say Wellman realized it before they even shot. Who knows? If there is footage, I'd love to see it, just like Eric Stoltz in Back to the Future. It always seemed off. Like, I was like, why didn't Frankie Darro play Cagney? But he kind of is playing Cagney. He's just playing Cagney in the wrong role. Nils Nathan's such a great character. I mean, I love him. It's like, they'll buy our beer or they won't buy any beer. Like that. I always remember that line. I love Nils Nathan. He's one of those like very enunciating actors, like working on their diction. Probably we're in that diction class, like in Singing in the Rain. Jean Harlow, who is odd and interesting. I even like Mae Clark as Kitty. The grapefruit scene is the famous scene. A lot of people have a lot of different stories about it, but Wellman says in his book that it's because one of his wives at the time, not the love of his life Dottie, but I think it might have been his second wife, and she would always have a grapefruit with breakfast, and they would always get in fights. He always wanted to shove the grapefruit in her fucking face, and he always wanted to do that, and that's why he put it in. A lot of people say that Mae Clark didn't know that was going to happen. She did know, apparently, for the most part. That's why she looks surprised. She's just a good actress. There's so many different versions of the scene, but I think Wellman's story is probably true. It's so memorable, and it shows so much about Tom Powers and how you don't want to piss him off because he's so reactionary. He is like a little dog, he's reactionary. He's gonna bite and bark if he has to and if he wants to, and if he's just in the mood to. I mean, he feels like he hates Mae Clark's Kitty character just because he woke up and he just doesn't feel like seeing her or something. It doesn't really have a reason. There's no scene where she pisses him off. This is the film that got me into Wellman. It's pretty much the reason I know who he is, because I looked up this film so many times. It's a film I've seen countless times and I love watching it. I've even reviewed it for YouTube before, but I wanted to redo it for my Wellman series, and I just love talking about this movie. I think it's a great film, and if you have any interest in gangster films and you haven't seen this, I mean, it's such an influence on Scorsese, and it's just a great fucking movie. I mean, I think it's probably Wellman's best film. I will see as I review the rest of his filmography. I think it's a great movie. It's a great gangster movie. It's a great action movie, and it's a great film from William Wellman. And I think it's one of his all-time great films. And if you ever want to get into William Wellman, or if you just want to see a classic, amazing film, you should see The Public Enemy. I can't stop talking about how much I just really love The Public Enemy. It's a great film. So if you have seen The Public Enemy and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And next week on Tuesday or Wednesday, I will do the next film in William Wellman's filmography, which is Other Men's Women, and that will be next week.